So this is work kind of coming out of, actually mostly Francesco's work. He came and joined Innopolis for a semester as a internship student. And so we were looking at dice. And we're really interested in dice because they're kind of this fundamental piece of both board games, tabletop games, and even, you know, when you think of like random number generators, of digital games. So I know Antonius was talking about, you know, what is the foundation of this? And when they say foundation of digital, I hear analog. So maybe that's another way you could go to the program committee and convince them, right? Foundations and digital means analog. So a lot of this is coming out of this oldest and most popular object in games, dice. There's discoveries dating back to, you know, the Egyptian period, the early Roman, the late Greek period of dice as we know them. The six-sided ones with the pips in the arrangement that we have it. There are examples of this. In fact, I've been to a few sites now in the Turkish Museum has a set of fully formed dice from the early Anatolian era and into the early Roman era. So they've been around for quite a while in terms of what we can find in the archaeological record. And so there's a lot of work on, you know, change the shape, change the colors, change all of this. But what's the player's perception of this? Have we really changed that much from that era? And how have people kind of adjusted and been affected by these modifications? So that's what we're kind of focusing on. In previous work, we were looking at like size and pips and colors and things like this. And this time what we want to do is kind of look at fairness. So how can we kind of perceive the fairness of dice when it's different than what you're used to rolling? So we were looking at 2d6s in this case. And looking at fairness in dice, we need to first start and look at the shapes that are available to build this. And a lot of them are coming out of these 30 different Euclidean shapes that have this property of a balanced size and balanced edges and symmetry. Because the human brain kind of wraps around symmetry and says, well, all of these are the same, therefore they're fair. But this is not always necessarily the case in how we design dice. And there's a company right now that is selling various types of skewed dice, which I was able to pick up over in Copenhagen, actually. Picked up all these different, you know, skewed and changed dice. So here we have the normal dice, just a normal pair of D6s with the sides as you would expect them. We have these skewed dice, which keep the, just change the shape. They don't change the arrangement of the pips. And we also have these kind of unusual dice here. And in this case, this actually comes out to the same probability distribution as 2d6, but they look incredibly different. And how you use them together is you sum across them, but they still give you the same distribution. Mathematically, all of these are equivalent. They will all roll 2d6, and they all are balanced in such a way that they should pertain to these as close as our engineering technology can make them. Okay. So we had an experimental setup of 4 steps. First, we did an initial survey, which is just, you know, the basic: who are you, what gender, what age, interest in video games and board games, history there. The next question is, we presented them with the 3 pairs of dice and asked them to rank them in terms of fairness. Which ones do you find to be more fair? And they informed them which one they thought was unfair, and also which one would they prefer to use. So which one would you prefer to try out? Then for the dice usability section, we had them do some play testing. And the big thing here is we want to kind of separate the dice fairness from the game, so we just used a snakes and ladders game, kind of a modified version. When you roll over the end of the board, usually you're supposed to sit there and keep rolling, but the idea was to get them to do a certain amount of rolls with each one of these types of dice. And so they played with each one of these. We also randomized the order in which they were presented. So I didn't always present the normal dice and then the skewed dice and then the unusual dice. That was changed from participant to participant in order to prevent any sort of bias coming into the sample. And finally, we had a reevaluation of the fairness of the menu. And we said, what is your thoughts on fairness now? Do you find all of these dice to be fair, unfair? Which ones are unfair, which ones are fair? Okay. For our participant, we had 65 participants, 48 males, 17 females, ages between 18 and 57 years old. It was basically whoever we were able to rope into a room in the university and have them play with us for a little bit. In terms of gameplay, approximately 5 hours on average playing board games and 13 hours playing video games. And I have to look at the paper to see under what timeline. I'm assuming over the course of a week, because 5 hours a day might be a bit much. For some people, maybe not for us. Depends on how you credit it in your university paperwork, right? Research, okay. So to begin with, the perception of fairness in the dice before this. So majority of the participants considered it to be fair if there was an equal probability of occurrence on all faces of the die. Okay, pretty good definition. Some participants measured they never thought that even an unfair die could exist in this. Some participants rolled the dice to inquire which are fair and unfair. So they want to get a gauge on this. And at the end, this is what they were able to come up with. So they said, basically, for the normal dice, they had about 96% thought, yes, these are fair. 45 said the skewed are fair, and the unusual, only 40%. So kind of makes sense, right? Normal dice, yes, everybody thinks that they're probably fair. You know, maybe a few were kind of like, you're trying to trick me. I think this is the 3 that are like, you're trying to trick me. Skewed kind of went down, but they look like the normal dice, whereas the unusual are far afield. And the reason considering for kind of the normal dice to be fair is participants were used to using it. So the decision about the unusual die was mostly unfair because of the repeated numbers on the die. So they look through, and there's some that have that repeated 6s and that because they're trying to make the 2d6 distribution. And most of them declared them to be unfair because of shape. After playing the game, what we saw was a pretty much the same on the normal, but we saw a statistically significant increase on both the skewed and unusual in terms of people then deeming them as fair. So after people played with them for a while, they realized that the outcomes were very close to what they got with the normal dice and then declared them to be fair. So the opinion about normal dice, again, about the same, and had mostly to do with kind of the roll outcomes. So dice rolls that gave unusually high or low numbers many times were considered unfair, and especially if it was low, because they were advancing less in the game. So there was this, if I roll low with these dice, the dice are unfair. But they're still all using the 2d6 distribution to a certain extent. Some participants did not change their opinion about the dice fairness and thought that they probably required a higher number of rolls to verify it. And a few participants also tried to control the roll. That is, they were like, I'm going to try to make these dice roll a 7. And would then, you know, hold them in a particular way. And some, you know, good gamblers are able to do this. That's why you usually use the dice cups in casinos and that. But after not succeeding, they declared, well, yeah, these dice are probably fair. And the last part, we asked them also to select which one that would they prefer to play with. So after the experiment, we saw kind of a move away from the normal dice. So after players played with these dice a while, they were like, well, you know what, I want to use the creative ones now, because now I believe that they are fair. And the primary reason for this, again, most familiar ones, easy to understand. And the unusual is that you now have this curiosity and fun, and I want to show my friends these cool things, and I want to, you know, use those, you know, strange in appearance objects. So I think what this says in general about games designed with these is if you're including these types of dice in your board game, there will be sort of an attraction to them through this, but conversely you have to get over the, you know, fairness. But if everybody's using the same dice in the game, that might not be a huge problem. A couple of interesting observations out of this. They considered, you know, in choosing the dice, they considered them not fair because they appeared funny, that they were curious, and they wanted to confirm whether the dice were fair or not. So on those selections. So in conclusion, participants provided feedback on the context of the dice usage, informed whether they would pick them depending upon the usage context. A lot of them said that if they were going to bet money, they would prefer the fair dice out of this or try to go for that. But for a game that, you know, we could choose an unfair dice just for curiosity and something that doesn't have a risk value against it. Other people were kind of curious, informed, and never thought about that fairness in dice issue. And a lot of it had to do with kind of the edges. They were really looking at, can I control this dice? Can I make it do that via the edges? So, and a lot of this changed because of rolling the dice, changed the perceptions, and showed interest then in using these unfair dice.